Hello, and welcome to our discussion. The topic for today is objective morality possible in the absence of a divine lawgiver. My name is Joshua Barlev, and I am the moderator. Let me introduce the two teams, the theists and the atheists. On the atheist side is David Baker, who is the son of an evangelical Christian pastor and held an unquestioning faith until 3 years ago. Upon questioning, he found no satisfactory basis for Christian beliefs, but instead found the basis for disbelief to be stronger, thus beginning a painful but rewarding process of losing his belief. Today, he still attends church with his Christian wife and newborn son and regularly plays on the worship team, while being open about his views and welcoming discussion. Our second atheist is Brian Broom, who, as a recovering Baptist, has founded The Deconverted, a meeting of individuals who are searching for fellow freethinkers. Brian believes community and companionship can be found outside of organized religion. And there is a website that I'll read, www.meetup.com/deconverted for more information. On the theist side is Jeremy Lawson, who graduated college with a BA in economics, cum laude. His professional expertise is in human resources, specializing in executive compensation, equity compensation, job architecture, and compensation analytics. His interests include philosophy, theology, apologetics, and Austrian economics. In his spare time, he enjoys reading and exercise. And on the theist side is also Suzanne Cartmel, who is a retired attorney and community volunteer. And at different periods, Mrs. Cartmel has practiced law and volunteered in various capacities, including the church vestry, in schools and on school boards, while raising 3 boys with her husband. She currently volunteers as a writer coach with Writer Coach Connection in the Albany Middle School. The format that we're going to use is we're going to have an initial presentation by the atheists, followed by the theists, followed by a questioning session by each side of the other side, and followed by my questions to a few of you or all of you. So we're going to start with the atheists, who are going to present their position. And Brian and David, are you ready?
Ready?
Yes.
Please proceed.
Thank you. First of all, just wanted to thank Jeremy for arranging this most important discussion today. We're very fortunate to have these conversations without fear of imprisonment or something worse. And it is essential for us to flex these muscles and to exercise these rights to ensure their survival. What this debate comes down to is essentially supernatural versus natural. Many theists would like you to believe that some sort of all-powerful being downloaded some kind of moral firmware upgrade into our brains at some point to give us this universal moral code to live by, and that this foundation is never changing and perfectly reflects the will and nature of the Creator. But is this reasonable? We would like to contend that it is more likely and much more reasonable to assert the idea that these are the results of biological and sociological evolution. Just look at the past 2,000 years and how much we had to evolve our thinking just to get to this point. If we take just the idea of thou shalt not kill, does that mean that no man has the right to kill another man, ever? In ancient times, it would depend on the class of the individual in question. The value of life depended greatly on the social stature of the individual, and even women were held at a much lower value than men. And in the Bible, after God tells his people it is wrong to kill in his 10 commandments, he then sets them out on a murderous rampage to claim their promised land. So, is not killing objectively true? Well, let's bring this question to a more recent dilemma. What about Osama bin Laden? Is it objectively wrong to kill a man whose only purpose in life was to find new ways to kill innocent civilians? Ask any person in America and you'll be hard-pressed to find someone who thought killing him was a bad idea. but I will bet if you asked his followers, you would get a very different answer. What if bin Laden said he was on a mission from God? Does that justify his murder as it does in the Bible? As you can see, this is not an easy question to answer. You would think that a question like, is it okay to kill, would be pretty plain to most people. But putting it in context to an individual, it becomes dependent on many factors. We are forced to answer what we call moral questions, whether we like it or not, and the reasoning boils down to an issue of fairness. This is why we have degrees of murder in our justice system, because it really depends on the intent of the crime. Was this just an unfortunate accident, or was it the result of malice? A jury is forced to use their reasoning to decide what is fair. They don't look to a supernatural divine lawgiver for answers.
Thank you, Brian. Is objective morality possible in the absence of a divine lawgiver? One of the great difficulties in this question lays in our definition of the word morality. Consulting several dictionaries, I found this common definition of morality, and it goes as such: behavioral conformity to a standard of good. Given that definition, we could say the answer to our question is clearly yes. Behavioral conformity to a standard of good is possible in the absence of a divine lawgiver. But this is hardly satisfactory, because how do we know that the standard of good is correct and not just some arbitrary standard? I personally think that this issue of arbitrariness is the root issue for many people, and that a common goal for both teams here in this debate is to be able to say that our moral precepts are not merely arbitrary. If moral precepts are arbitrary, why should we really follow them? Using said definition of morality and splitting the original question into two separate questions, I think the answers become much clearer. Is behavioral conformity to a divine standard of good possible in the absence of a divine lawgiver? Well, the answer, of course, is no. Is behavioral conformity to a non-divine standard of good possible in the absence of a divine lawgiver? The answer, of course, is yes. So my question is, which standard of good is less arbitrary? The divine standard or the non-divine standard? The theist might maintain that if morality is not divinely given, then all we have is a bunch of people's opinions on how to behave, which seems completely arbitrary. I share the theist's conviction that morality must be more than arbitrary, more than just people's opinions. But I disagree that a divine standard of good is the solution. The way I view morality is that I believe the standard of good for humans is that which is good for humans, promotes human well-being. Some of the reasons that I hope to elaborate more upon throughout this debate are written down right here. I think that the things which promote human well-being are actually absolute facts, built into our biological makeup. For example, drinking bleach, not good for humans. Drinking water, good for humans. Societies which permit theft, murder, lying, slavery, rape, hard drug use, etc., are chaotically worse places for humans to live than societies which forbid such behavior. Now, these, I believe, are absolute facts. These are not opinions that I just propounded, and they are independent of supernatural theories. Another reason that I'd like to give for my secular view of morality is that I think the trajectory of human moral development throughout history appears to be aimed at that standard I just gave, the standard of that which promotes human well-being. Now, a couple reasons I have for rejecting the theistic view of morality is what in essence was Euthyphro's dilemma 2,400 years ago. And that, a modern spin on that is to ask, why is God's nature considered good? Is God's nature good simply because it matches God's nature? Or is God's nature good by some other standard of good? These are the two horns that they call of Euthyphro's dilemma. On the first horn, if God's nature is good by no external standard, but simply because it matches God's nature, we've run into a circular definition, and we've actually rendered the meaning of the word good rather arbitrary. On the second horn, if God's nature is good by some external standard, well, then that external standard is actually the ultimate standard of good. And we've sort of rendered God unnecessary on these matters.
David, could you wrap up your position, please?
I would. So, in summary, for me, appealing to a theoretical divine lawmaker's arbitrary nature makes morality more arbitrary and elusive than appealing to the biological, discoverable facts about that which is good for humans. Thank you.
So now we're going to hear from Jeremy and Suzanne.
All right, I'll begin. So, I want to propose an alternative to the moral system offered by Brian and David. The metaphysical system upon which this argument is based is called divine command morality. The argument is simple. Premise 1, absent God, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise 2, objective moral values and duties do exist. Therefore, God exists. First, a definition of terms. What does it mean to say that something is an objective moral value or duty? By this, I mean that duties and values are good or evil, right or wrong, absolutely. In other words, prior to and regardless of any subjective opinion about them. To use the most frequently cited example, the genocide committed against the Jews during World War II was evil and would have remained evil even if Germany had won World War II and brainwashed everybody who thought otherwise. Actions are good or evil regardless of what anyone thinks. Premise 2 is simpler, so I'll address it first. If objective moral values and duties did not exist, if moral values and duties were purely subjective, then there might be some society in which murder, rape, and theft were right rather than wrong, good rather than evil. Most of us, I think, know inherently that such actions are wrong, period. On to premise 1. How does God provide a foundation for objective moral values and duties? As a maximally great being, God is the embodiment of great-making properties. Love, charity, justice are perfectly expressed by our divine Creator. These are our values. God's morals are communicated to us via divine commands, which constitute our moral duties. Note here that I'm not speaking of a particular God, but rather a general deistic God. This argument is not intended as a defense of the Christian, Jewish, or Muslim God. This debate is about whether or not morality can be grounded objectively in anything other than God, not about whether the God of a particular religion can be qualified as good. To effectively defeat this argument, the opposition must give an explanation of how it is possible to derive objective moral values and duties absent God. Several common responses deserve consideration. One of the most common alternatives that has been proposed is that in the course of human evolution, one of the traits that emerged as advantageous was a sense of morality. Whether this morality is developed in a cultural, national, or religious context is of little importance. The crucial point is that the morality we sense as objective is actually the result of a long process of evolution. This view has multiple problems. In this view, morality is only perceived as objective. If we were to rewind the evolutionary clock, a different set of morals might very well emerge. Since contradictory morals could emerge from the evolutionary process, these morals are in no sense objective, as the theist uses the word. Moreover, what makes this set of morals binding upon all members of society? One cannot use this theory to convince someone whose moral feelings disagree with yours that he is wrong and ought to behave differently, nor can he convince you. If you made such an argument to a sociopath who took this position on the sources of morality, but who had a taste for human flesh, he could say to you, your rules are just the outcome of a long process of totally contingent events, each of which was governed by nothing but happenstance. Every one of them might have turned out differently. The same goes for me. My rules are different. And he would be correct, because under this theory, the rules of society are not really moral in the sense that they are not objectively binding on us. They do not oblige us. Societal or cultural moral reform would be impossible. A reformer, by definition, contravenes the existing norms of the society in which he operates. By advocating reform of the moral principles of the majority, he would necessarily contradict that majority's moral values and duties. Any moral progression would be made impossible. Objective moral rules aren't like that. There is no getting out of them. So I think we have seen that this theory really fails. It may tell us how we evolved our social rules and how they work to our advantage in the world, but it cannot tell us whether our rules are right or whether our moral views are true. Other attempts have been made to ground morality objectively, apart from God. An atheist might also adopt a natural law stance and say that a realm of objective moral values and duties exists apart from physical matter, and we humans are able to apprehend this realm through a fortunate evolutionary coincidence. By saying this, the atheist is abandoning his original position, that the physical world is all that exists, for a much more radical one, that there exists a separate reality entirely apart from the physical. He offers no evidence of this reality, only that it indeed exists, as certain as matter of gravity. The questions compound. How did this reality come to exist? How can he know he perceives it accurately? How is he able to explain how humans, each evolving differently, would possess the ability to perceive this reality in the same manner? More importantly, what basis does he have for concluding that the values this reality seeks to impose are obligatory? Whether survival and procreation of one's genes run contrary to these morals, it would make sense to ignore them completely.
Jeremy, just so you know, you have about 3 minutes
Left?
left.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Perfect. If there is a natural law but no God, then morality turns out to be just as much a matter of happenstance as it did under the evolutionary theory we've already disproved. The only difference between these two theories is in where they locate the sheer happenstance at the root of what we call morality. Under the evolutionary theory we've already discredited, morality arose as a matter of sheer happenstance within the history of our universe. The atheist natural law theory says that it arose as an integral aspect of our universe, that, because there is no God, itself arose as a matter of sheer happenstance, mere brute fact. Under this theory, the sociopathic cannibal could say, I recognize that there is a natural law that says I ought not to kill and eat you. But the natural law, like the rest of existence, is a matter of sheer happenstance. I too am a matter of sheer happenstance, and I happen to feel differently about morality than the rest of our universe. And again, he'd be right. In the absence of God, both the theories we've talked about boil down in the end to there is absolutely no binding, objective, moral truth, but rather only happenstance. When push comes to shove, then, the only way there can be such a thing as morality is if there is an omniscient, necessary God who knows without possibility of error what is right. In conclusion, I think that we have seen how objective moral values and duties can be grounded by divine command and morality in God. I've pointed out some of the problems inherent in alternative systems of morality. The opposition must illustrate both how divine command morality is flawed and how objective moral values and duties can be derived from an atheistic metaphysical landscape. Unless and until the opposition can accomplish these two tasks, I think that the rational thing to do is to accept divine command morality and consequently God.
Thank you, Jeremy. So now we're going to hear back from Brian and David, and you're going to have an opportunity to question Suzanne and Jeremy. So who would like to begin?
I'll begin. Okay. So your theory is that morality comes from divine command, and our theory is that morality is that which promotes human well-being. So I would like to ask you, what is the purpose of a list of moral precepts?
To prescribe what you should and should not do, to prescribe forbidden actions and obligatory actions.
Okay. And do we need God to discover or accomplish those purposes?
We're arguing that to define an objective standard of morality, you do need someone who is, or a being who is above the partisan, in effect, the self-interested sides of two opposing factions.
I see.
Can you give me a couple examples of a certain moral precept that would be true and binding for every human being on the planet? That's objectively true. I mean, there has to be a list of these.
Well, I want to be careful because we would have to get into individual religious doctrine, and this is a debate about a general deistic God, not the God of a certain theism or polytheism. So I'm happy to give you what I believe.
Okay.
But speaking from the point of our side, I wouldn't feel comfortable answering that.
So that's basically my problem with that particular theory, is that if you can't give any examples of where it would actually work. So if you can't say that we have commandments from God, but I don't know what they are, it really depends on what you believe, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, it's important to distinguish. This theory gets you part of the way to theism. It's a philosophical argument based on metaphysically true premises that follow necessarily to some God existing. Beyond that, I agree. To figure out specific commandments, you have to look to religious text. For example, You cited the Ten Commandments. One, thou shalt not murder. I would argue that that is an objectively binding commandment because God has said it.
Okay. To reiterate, our view is that morality is that behavior which promotes human well-being. So, can you name a moral precept which does not promote human well-being?
I'd have to think about that.
Once again, referring to specific faiths, you're saying, to go outside of the concept of a divine lawgiver generally, but you want to talk about the commands of a particular faith.
Oh no, I'm looking for the objective moral precepts that you theorize of. Can you name some of those which don't promote human well-being?
Well, I have something for you,
Okay.
and I'm going to make this a subject of another question. I was reading in the news that there are researchers who are advocating that post-birth abortion should be permitted. And the basis on which that was being advocated was that it might make the mother feel better. It might make her life easier if she didn't have to take care of this baby. And the interests of the baby, according to the person advocating this position, were not important because essentially they were saying it wasn't a person, that it was, though already born, it did not have the capability of knowing about the moral worth of its own life. So I would say that that's very much adverse to the interests of the well-being of the baby, and I believe that the position that was being taken that this should be considered was a humanistic well-being position. So I would find a conflict there.
Okay. You did just concede that killing the baby was adverse to the well-being of the baby, which is indeed
But it was
human,
supposedly
right?
for the well-being of the mother.
So in this case, we have to consider more than just one individual.
Absolutely, and that's part of the divine commands of most faiths.
So outside of the divine command, hypothetically, which may be difficult to think about, but if we did not have that divine command not to kill that baby, would you see any other reason not to kill that baby?
I mean, if it were my baby, I certainly wouldn't kill it. But the question is not to a one person, does this seem bad? I'm sure that most of the people on earth would say, no, that's horrendous. The question is that if it's not in your particular evolutionary self-interests, why do anything moral? For example, if you're starving alone and you know that if you have a baby and nurture it, you'd probably both die. It would be in your self-interest to abandon the baby. Divine command morality would say, or the Christian divine command morality would say, no, you don't do that. Similarly, if you're walking along an icy stream and you see a little girl drowning, do you rush in and save her? By humanistic methods, naturalistic methods, the answer would be probably no, because you know that if you rush in there, there's a good chance you'll both die, and you want to save your own genes to be passed on to future generations. However, if you're working under a divine command morality, that gives you a reason to do what you know is already right in your heart.
So I think one question we had certainly about divine command theory is that what if the commander of these moral precepts changes their mind as far as what's moral? Wouldn't you be forced just by association to change your mind about what you think is moral? Say God says that you have to, well, I mean, just take a biblical example. When he tells Abraham to kill Isaac, right? He just says, do it because I said you need to do it. And what if he went through with it? What if that's what it took for him to prove his worth to God and he had to kill his own child? Is that considered moral then? Because God demanded it?
Well, since you are assuming into the equation the story of an almighty God who gave life to Abraham and Isaac, one of the accounts that I've read about this suggests that Abraham believed he was being tested. He had already been told that he would be the father of many, many more children than the stars, I think it is. And so in his mind, he trusted in God and believed that the outcome was going to be the survival of his child, whether that would be through the child dying and coming back to life or not being actually put to the test. That his trust in God's command was what in effect made him capable of following it, and did result in the survival not only of Isaac but of the entire Hebrew people.
Well, I mean,
regarding the first part of your question, regarding the mutability of God, the philosophical God of which I'm speaking is unchanging. His nature is love, justice, charity, honor, expressed to their infinite degrees. The definition of God that Plato and Aristotle use is the good. He would be incapable of changing, because a being which changed its nature and thus its commands to you is less good than an unchanging being which does not change. So I would say that if a creature is thinking about God as changing, he's thinking about the wrong God.
May I lead
Any more questions?
how much
David?
time do we have?
You've
Josh?
got a couple of minutes to ask questions.
Okay.
Well,
You
one thing
have
I would
something?
just say is that I still would like to press you on that, because in that particular instance, that story of Abraham and Isaac, if you know the outcome, it doesn't really sound like a test, right? But I'm saying that what if that push, what if somebody believed in their mind that this God was telling them to do something against their moral fiber? And people have done those types of things in history. So how do you know the difference between God telling you to do something and, say, psychosis?
Well, I think it's a fair question, but I'm not sure it's a question that relates to whether objective morality can be grounded outside of God. In other words, it seems like a question having to do with the workings of this, or the application of the principle, so that if someone thinks God is telling them to do something and it isn't really God, that I don't think that applies to our...
I guess I would agree. The question presupposes that there is some absolute standard of good and evil, right and wrong, which you have to follow or not follow based upon what you would think God is telling you. Now, into the individual case where you think God is telling you something, I'll say it quite honestly, I don't know. I would argue that if you have children and you think God is telling you to kill them, you should probably see a psychiatrist. But that's really a peripheral issue. That's not the question of the debate at hand. That's, once we've established this, now we can get into all these other issues.
Right.
I would just close by saying the question is, where does that intuition come from? So I think it is a relevant issue.
Mm-hmm.
Where does your intuition that killing your children is wrong, even if you think the Lord has commanded it?
Well, as a Christian, I believe, according to Paul, that the moral commandments of God are imprinted on all human hearts, so that all are not without excuse. Now, that's what I believe as a Christian. Do you want to ask one more question?
Well, it's. I mean,
No, I think we should have you, but are you both finished answering that question? And then we should turn
I
it
think
around
so.
and
I mean,
have
to
you...
me, it's sort of a question about the workings of the system rather than the possibility of a morality coming outside of God.
Okay, understood.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So it's your turn to ask questions, and I think this is a good dialogue, so proceed.
Well, I guess I would like to take you up on your standard of well-being and talk about another case that I read in the news, which was that of a person who had the locked-in syndrome, which is the state of being incapable of moving or responding in any way to stimuli, and which I believe at times, there have been those advocating that providers and so on, people be able to decide what the well-being of that person potentially was. And in this particular factual case, the man somehow, contrary to the expectations of the doctors, survived, even though they couldn't tell that he was able to hear them or had any awareness of what was going on. And I think he said that he was aware, in fact. So the reason for bringing it up is that it is a part of this humanistic philosophy that not only that is the standard, this supposed objective standard being the well-being of others, but that in certain cases, one person can decide about what the well-being of another person is. and take action or not take action on the basis of that. And I would like to ask you whether that is a flaw in this. It creates a moral evil, in effect, so that one person is making incorrect decisions about the well-being of someone else.
I don't think any of us can possibly know the future outcome of any medical condition, so we're all, I think, in the same boat as far as how we deal with that moral issue. I would equate it almost the similar way as if you were to say, okay, well, I'm going to ignore doctor's care and use prayer and laying of hands on my friend and watch them die that way. I mean, is that moral if the outcome's the exact same?
Well, of course, part of my question is, should I be able to decide about what's in your well-being interest?
Or should
I
you?
see.
Yeah, or should you be able
Should
to
one person
decide,
decide for another person?
Yeah.
I see.
If they can't decide for
If,
themselves,
if
is what
we
you're saying?
can't tell whether they can decide for themselves.
Right.
So certainly in the scenario that you mentioned, one of the outcomes will promote more well-being than the other outcome. And as Brian said, yeah, we are not prophetic, we can't see the future. Through a long history of trial and error, and there have been plenty of trials and plenty of errors, we have been determining generalities, moral precepts about which actions tend to lead to the best well-being in the end. And so, yeah, I would say that terminating or not terminating this locked-in syndrome person's life, one of those will lead to a better well-being for that person, for humanity in general.
Yeah, and I don't think any of us believe that euthanizing people left and right is the best way to go about it. I think it is about what is the best, the most likely outcome that we can possibly know without knowing the future.
I think your assumption that the humanistic view would be to automatically terminate him is very assumptive.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it comes up that people
Certainly.
feel that they are in the position of deciding for someone else. And I guess what my question is it wrong to put yourself in the position of adopting that as your moral standard and then a person being the judge of another person's well-being
I see.
and withholding care?
Well, I think this is where it's not objective. It depends greatly on the situation and each person. I mean, what if the person's will? I mean, I have signed a end of life thing for a friend of mine who has made the decision that if I am incapable of making those decisions, I want to be terminated, and that's a tough thing to do. I would hate to be put in that position, but it is something that some of us have to deal with. And like it or not, there's no black and white. There's no right answer, wrong answer. You have to do what you would hope would be the right thing for the best outcome.
May I ask
Go
you a
ahead.
question?
Go ahead.
So, would you guys consider yourselves materialists?
Naturalist, I think, is a word
Considering
I...
that, yeah.
I mean, generally, materialism is a philosophical position that's entailed by naturalism.
Generally, yes.
Yes. So,
okay.
So this pen is made of ink and plastic. What do you think morals are made of? Where do they come from? Are they just illusions bouncing around off of your neural firings in your head, or do you believe there's actually something there underneath it?
I don't think it would be correct to say that morality has a physical element. I think
not physical.
because you're comparing it to a pen, so that's not like
Yeah.
somewhat.
It's obviously not a pen.
Right.
You can't see them. But do they exist somewhere outside of the physical world, or are they all in our head?
What is the penguin's instinct to migrate made of?
Right.
Is there any material behind that? Or is there any supernatural material
I think
behind
that is considered to be a purely physical process, but that's one of the differences between theists and atheists,
Well-
that we believe animals are one thing and that we are animals plus something.
Also, I don't want to let them dodge this question. Do you believe that love, charity, justice exists only in our heads? Or do you believe they exist in some other dimension of being from time eternal?
I think I can answer that pretty easily by saying I believe those qualities exist only in our dimension. I don't know of them existing in some other dimension.
What I meant by that is, do you believe that they exist objectively as real entities apart from this pen or this bottle of water? But do you believe that there are actual concepts out there, objectively, that are viewable by all humanity.
Like Platonic forms?
If you want to think of it that way, sure.
Like, is a circle eternal, even though there's no perfect circle in the universe?
Well, like love or charity or justice.
Maybe we can equate this to free will. I mean, that's been a topic lately. Is is free will? Does it exist? Some people say no. Some people say they do. But I think the atheist will say that, ironically, that we don't have a choice. It's just there. It's part of our makeup. But the theist would say that that it comes from a divine commander, and that
Okay. So what would you say to a sociopath who's evolved a different makeup from you? He could say I'm more highly evolved than the rest of them. I act completely in my own self-interest, which passes on my genes on average better than does theirs. How would you be able to pass judgment on his different set of morals if he's evolved differently?
I don't think I could pass judgment on his morals, but I would pass judgment on his actions, certainly.
Well, I mean, morals or actions are simply morals executed, right? You act on what you believe your morals to be. So if you pass judgment on the actions which are motivated by his morals, you're passing judgment on his morals. I'm asking, how are you able to get from an is to an ought? How are you going to be able to get from I feel this way, therefore you should feel this way, under the atheistic system?
I would say by referring to the absolute facts of our biological makeup, and certainly to the fact that evolution favors a species which cooperates in general. And our human species is certainly no exception to that. In fact, a prime example of that, I would say. And I want to respond to your first question about love. Yes, I do believe love exists. I love my wife, and I believe it is all contained within our nice dimension here.
So you can touch it?
No, can't touch it.
Okay.
Can't touch penguins' instincts either.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can't touch ideas.
Yeah, can't touch ideas. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Ideas are something that you make up in your mind. Sure.
Continue?
Go ahead.
Then, if these things exist objectively, how are you able to be certain that your cognitive faculties, which have been evolved for finding food, finding shelter, finding a wife, how are you able to be certain that those cognitive faculties have evolved to perceive these outwardly existing qualities?
That's a great question, but I would ask you, what other faculties shall I base it on if I don't prefer those? I have none. And I'm not omniscient. I don't know everything. I have to use what I've got.
Right.
So let me interrupt here for a moment. And feel free to continue to ask each other questions, but let me ask a question.
Certainly.
How would each side here define immorality, A, and B, where does immorality come from under each of your conceptions of existence? Let me start with Jeremy and Suzanne.
Well, since in a way it just, by definition, we have said in effect that morality comes from God's nature and his commands, so what would be immoral would be contrary to the express commands or the nature of God. And what the second part of that was, that's both where.
So
it
where
comes
does
from.
it come from?
Morality comes from God's holy, good, pure nature. It's expressed to us in the form of commands. These things are good. These things are not good, or a privation of good. To do anything less than the good is to do evil, I would say.
So do humans know when they're being immoral?
I haven't always been religious, actually, and I certainly, even when I was doubting, had a conscience inside that knew when what I was doing was wrong and when it was right.
So it's that consciousness of good and evil.
Right, and there are people who don't have that, of course, but generally speaking, most people have a conscience.
So why wouldn't they have it? If it's divinely inspired, why doesn't every human have it? Have a sense of wrong and right that is divinely inspired?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I think that doesn't mean that some things aren't wrong, basically. I mean, I think that there are people who are...
I would argue that just because as a Christian again, I believe that this world is fallen. There are going to be certain degradations from God's conception of what a human being is. This results in disability, sociopathy, cases like that.
Destruction.
Just because one is handicapped does not mean that because one has erred from the main does not mean that one is a rule setter.
But it does not necessarily mean that because someone has that disability that they themselves are responsible for something causing that. But the world generally has, you know what I'm saying, the world generally has this fallen state.
Let me turn to the two of you and ask you to answer that question if you can remember it.
You said where does morality come from?
Where does immorality come
Okay.
from?
Okay. I had something a minute ago and
Would
I
you
just
like
lost
me
it.
to-
Go ahead.
Okay, so I define morality as that which promotes human well-being, and immorality, I would say, behavior which does not promote human well-being, but actually promotes human suffering, does not promote human health, does not promote happiness, but maybe even diminishes those things.
And we
it's-
learn those through trial and error.
That's right.
And if I could say that this is also an evolving process, I don't think that there is an absolute decision on what is immoral, because if you look at a lot of the theist side, they believe, I mean, some still do believe that homosexuality is immoral, yet we find it in nature. So we don't necessarily tag that as an immoral act. So why is there such a discrepancy between what a moral lawgiver believes and what's natural?
So you would say that the sense of morality and immorality is a kind of an evolutionary trial and error at which we sort of over thousands and millions of years have kind of learned and continue to learn what works.
Right, what's best.
Yes, and
what's
hopefully continue to revise as we make more errors
Yeah.
and conduct more trials.
And in your view?
Well, in my view, if we were to rewind the evolutionary clock, different things might be suited to human well-being. There's no saying that our specific set of moral values and duties would be conducive to human well-being. So if you can rewind the process and get A and not A in the same set of variables, it's not objective. As for where I think it comes from, divine command morality is a relatively simple idea. God is absolute, the absolute good. He expresses his goodness to human beings in the form of moral commandments.
When I look back on my tradition, one of our wise Talmudists said several thousand years ago that he could sum up morality or the moral precepts and commands in a pretty simple sentence, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and all the rest is commentary. Do you both agree with that? Whether yours is based on trial and error and evolution, or yours is based on divine, a kind of a divine origin.
I think that's a good start. It really is a good start to go there. The only problem I find with the do unto others as you would have them do unto you is that it doesn't work in every case. Osama bin Laden is someone I want to see treated differently than I would like to treat myself. You know, there are certainly people out there who I think deserve punishment, and that's not something that I would necessarily want for myself.
Again, the question is about whether the golden rule. I mean, for our tradition, again, speaking specifically of Christianity, the commandments, the main summary of the law and prophets are love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so perhaps that's just a sort of a restatement of the same principle, but that's...
What would it be, would the same moral objective rule, whether under your rule, your process, or yours, what would it be for Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, Jews? Would it differ?
Would the moral duties...
Would the nature of morality, whether it's divinely inspired or evolutionarily inspired, would it be the same under different religions?
Actually, in comparative studies of different religions, a wide swath of the world's religions, including those that are not mainline religions, agree on most of their moral precepts. There's disagreement about 10 to 5% of it, but the trend is towards agreeing much, much more than disagreeing. And that's exactly what you would expect if God's moral law is written on all our hearts.
So the question in my mind is, would we expect that the lists of moral precepts that different religions or cultures come up with to be the same? No, I would say, of course, we can't expect that. They've evolved separately, or rather they've been segregated in their own culture or their own country, and they've developed their own list based on their own trials and errors. And we've developed our lists. And yeah, the lists are going to differ a little bit. But also the lists are going to be, did you say 90, 95% the same? Because we have the same biological makeup. And drinking bleach is bad across the board for all humans.
Yeah.
We've got a very short time, but I guess I wanted to ask you, as I listened to this, you two, the two sides seem to be so overlapping that I wonder really what is the difference. And let me ask each of you, and we'll start with the theists. You have about 30 seconds to say what you think your common ground is.
We both sides, I think, want to do good. I think that's our common ground. We have different ways of approaching how to find that good, but we both want to do good.
Yeah, I would agree. I agree that we're all looking for the same truth, and we're looking for a way for us to basically just get along and come to that common ground. And I think that's more important now than ever.
And as I said at the beginning, I think a common goal is that we want to know that our lists of moral precepts are not purely arbitrary, because then that makes us ask, well, what good are they? Why don't we trade them in? Why should we follow them?
I mean, I think the most important things have been said, that we do have a lot in common, that Christians or theists don't believe atheists aren't trying to do good. But you asked about common ground. Obviously, the difference is the belief in
In the
God.
origin.
Right.
Thank you very much, all four of you. This has been really stimulating and
you.
Enjoyable.
Thank you.
And we'll look forward to a continued dialogue between the four of you and others. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
Keep talking like you're talking.
Ah.